Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to Out at the Library. My name is Carl Olson. I am a library worker here. This is my colleague Molly Kliss, and we are the Out at the Library Divas. This is Missoula's first queer literary festival and an accompanying exhibit from the San Francisco Public Library. We're absolutely thrilled that it's here, and we're thrilled that you're here to take part in it. I'm going to refrain from chatter for now, which is hard, and invite you to enjoy with us the sounds of Missoula's own Missoula Men's Chorus.
Broken and all men will have their reward. Will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me? Somewhere beyond the barricade, is there a world you long to see? Do you hear the people sing? Say, do you hear the distant drums? It is the future that they bring when tomorrow comes. Will you join in our crusade? Be strong and stand with me. Somewhere beyond the barricade, is there a world you long to see? Do you hear the people sing? Say, do you hear the distant drums? It is the future that they bring when tomorrow comes.
We so much appreciate being able to be here for this great event, and looking at the events that are planned over the next 6 weeks. I think these people have done an incredible job. They have brought us a lot. So. We are the Missoula Men's Chorus, and our mission is to spread the fun and pleasure of music to bring communities together throughout the state of Montana, and it's working. And we've just given you, we're going to sing 3 numbers tonight. The first one was Do You Hear the People Sing from Les Mis, a song about freedom. And of course, being a being a men's chorus, we do like to have some fun too. So this next number we're going to do is about something very significant in gay and lesbian history, and that was the Stonewall riots. Back in those 60s, for those who might remember those. And so this song is actually taking that subject matter and treating it with a little bit of levity. And then the final song we're going to sing is about the very art of storytelling. So here is Stonewall Serenade feature soloist Fred.
the daily paper, I'm more and more amazed at a world which once was easy to define. For today I read a warning on this balmy summer morning of June 28, 1969. It says whenever you see a homosexual walking by, give him a smile and wave and call a cheery hi. Don't degrade him as you may usually do. Don't forget that homos may have feelings too. Whenever you see a pair of lesbians in the street, say howdy do or something equally sweet. Don't revile or otherwise criticize, or you may be in for a little surprise. It seems that there's an in with homos within, a charming, adorable place, unassuming and quiet. But last night when the police came to establish some peace, the charming, adorable customers started a riot.
Carry the furniture round.
So when you see women walking on the
Walking arm in arm.
don't give them any
Cause to feel alarmed.
Don't throw rocks and bellow hey.
Hey, you lumberjacks.
The lesbians and gays are fighting back.
Oh,
The lesbians and gays are fighting back.
smile and say hello to
I wish we could just keep them here for the 5 weeks that the exhibit's up and have them sing every time people come and look at the exhibit. Thank you, Missoula Men's Chorus. The exhibit will be here for 5 weeks. You saw it out in the hall. You may not have time tonight to really study it. There's a lot of detail there. Molly and I put it together last night. We were here till midnight. It was really supposed to be about heavy lifting, and we kept getting distracted by the content of the exhibit and reading it. And then we're like, oh yeah, we have a job to do to put it up. The literary festival that we're having brings the exhibit to life in many ways. And I just want to point out some highlights. There's a panel in the exhibit that is devoted to Harvey Milk, who was the first openly gay official in the United States. The Jeanette Rankin Peace Center is showing a film called The Life and Times of Harvey Milk on campus. So if you read the panel and want to learn more, I encourage you to take that in. There's a panel on Patricia Highsmith, one of my favorite authors. She wrote The Talented Mr. Ripley, and among others. And we're going to have a forum on lesbian literature. There's a panel devoted to Harry Hay, who is the fairy godfather of the modern gay rights, civil rights movement. And one of Harry's friends and editors, Harry's not with us anymore, but his friend and editor, Will Roscoe, will be here in May, and there will be a discussion, and you can ask him about Harry Hay if you'd like. There's a panel about poets and artists, and we have a poetry kiosk in the lobby as well, and it features not only some classic gay and lesbian poets you may be familiar with, but also some of our favorite Montana queer poets. I encourage you to check that out. So it's all going to be up here for about 4 or 5 weeks. Visit us often. In May also, I want to just give you a little preview in addition to the full schedule of events we have for this month. Next month, the library will be featuring a display on Thomas Savage. He was a Dillon native and the author of what I like to call Montana's first gay cowboy novel. We will unveil something I think is a first for the library, a literary map of the Brokeback Mountain universe. And in May also we'll launch a whole series of young adult programs and a children's lit event, all related to LGBT and queer issues. So we've just filled up your dance card for you for the next 2 months. You can't do anything else. Generosity is the engine that drives out at the library. It's all made possible by our major donors. I want to take a moment to acknowledge them: the High Stakes Foundation, Humanities Montana, Montana Human Rights Network, and the Equality Project, and David C. Moomey. Please give them a hand. Several library entities also funded this event in very big ways, and they include the Missoula Public Library Foundation, the Friends of Missoula Public Library, and the MPL Adult Programming Committee. So please give them a hand. Other funders and forms of support come from the Western Montana Gay and Lesbian Community Center, the Montana Pride Network, the University English and Creative Writing Departments, Shakespeare and Company, Fact and Fiction, Marianne Flockersy, and as we just heard, Missoula Men's Chorus. We couldn't do it without all of those folks. I'm going to turn it over to Molly.
And for those of you in the back, there's plenty of seats in the front, so feel free to come forward while I'm talking and find a seat if you'd like. We are absolutely honored to have Patricia Nell Warren, best-selling author Patricia Nell Warren, here with us this evening. As a novelist, a poet, and an investigative journalist, Patricia has written prolifically about the gay and lesbian experience. In 1974, she published The Front Runner, a novel that would become the most popular gay love story of all time. It has now sold over 10 million copies worldwide and has been translated into 8 different languages. She has published 8 successful novels, 4 books of poetry, is a popular columnist, and an active political activist. And among her many achievements, she won the National Cowboy Hall of Fame's Western Heritage Award, the Lambda Literary Award, and has been inducted into the Gay and Lesbian Hall of Fame. Although Patricia currently lives in San Francisco, her roots in Montana run very deep. She was born and grew up on the Grant Coors Cattle Ranch near Deer Lodge and has never cut her ties with Montana, and many of her novels take place here. She told me that she didn't leave Montana because she wanted to, but because if you wanted to work in the publishing industry in the 1950s, you had to go to New York. So we are so glad that the Patricia is back in Montana and here with us this evening, so let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. It's such an honor to be here. Such a special evening. For me, it ranks right up there with the discovery of gold and Montana becoming a state. I think that with this beginning of this program, this wonderful step that is so history-making, it's like Montana is taking a new step in her growing up and becoming a very different kind of state. And I just feel incredibly happy and proud to be here and to share this evening with you and pledge my ongoing support to this program. Whatever you guys need from me, you have only to ask. I've been asked to talk about why gay culture is important. And I think that's a really great question, and I think it's a great idea to start with, culture is one of those words that we bandy around every day. What is culture? It's a great sociological term, word in the dictionary. And it seems to me that culture, whether it's a country or a community or a group of people, when we talk about culture, it comes from the word cultivation. When you grow a culture in a petri dish, in a laboratory, you cultivate a garden, you cultivate an orchard or a wheat crop. And so you're talking about living, growing things. People and their emotions, their attitudes, their beliefs, their thoughts. And cultures have histories. If we look at, I love history. And they are born, they grow up, they mature, they get old, they have adventures along the way, some of them wonderful, some of them not. They make mistakes, they change directions, and inevitably they die or they get plowed under and grow up again in some new form. We certainly can say that there is American culture, but I think that you would get a lot of arguments and different definitions of what that culture is, depending on whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, what party you're going to vote for in the upcoming election, where you're at on any of the issues that divide the country. Different people will define American culture different ways. The same for Montana. Montana has had her moments of incredible progressivity. Montana has had her retrograde moments, depending on what Montanans you talk to. You will get a very different definition of Montana culture. And the same goes for those people that we call LGBT people. I don't go on and on with the acronym. I wish we would come up with a word that would cover it all. So hopefully our culture will come up with that word eventually. I think it would be difficult to have any one definition of what gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgendered and intersex culture is. Many different people with their perspectives, their thoughts, their dreams, their lives, how they started, their adventures, their tears, their tragedies, their victories. It's a very personal thing. So the definition of culture that I've come to personally is that it's about a perspective. I think there are as many different cultures. Each of you here in this room is here tonight with a perspective about what this is all about. Your own life, your friends, your families, what you've been through. You bring to this room different perspectives. I have my perspective because of the life that I've lived and where I've been and what I've done and times when I fell on my face and got up and went on. And I think that there is value to all of these different perspectives in a culture. I think that it wouldn't be human or normal if we ever 100% agreed with one another on anything. I think that the debates and the discussions are part of it all, part of the process. I think that any culture where there were no disagreements and where everybody was absolutely in agreement would be a culture that I wouldn't want to live in. I would think that everybody would be kind of brainwashed. It would not be very much fun to live in a culture where everybody agreed. So our culture is like that, and certainly we've been around a long time. As someone who loves and studies history, not only have we been here in Montana from the very beginning, we know we've been here, but we've been here in the United States from the beginning. We've been part of the history of the world from the beginning. And for me, as someone who loves history, the challenge is to study, look for our footprints wherever they are. Because it's a funny thing about the past. We understand more about where we are now and where we want to go if we have a clear idea of where we come from. So one of my projects in recent years has been, because I started out being very involved in sports and have written books about sports, notably The Front Runner, which some of you have probably read. And I have continued with a project that I call the real life front runners, writing profiles of gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered individuals who were great in the sports world in real life. And some of these articles that I have written, which were originally published on a website called outsports.com, for you sports buffs and fans here in the room, if you haven't ever been there, it's a great website. And I got to them with this idea. So I've covered many, many different sports, and those original articles are now out in this. This is my first nonfiction book. They're collected together under the title, The Lavender Locker Room. Woo. 3,000 years of great athletes whose sexual orientation was different. Trying to stay away from the acronym kind of words there. Going clear back to the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. We've been around a long time. And of course, while I was in the course of doing this first part of the series, along came the movie Brokeback Mountain. So I could not resist doing the piece about gay cowboys, real-life gay rodeo cowboys, and with some frequent mentions of Montana in the story. For those of you who would like to read that article, it's in this book. And what I'd like to do is read a little bit from another article that I just recently wrote, because I think it illustrates my point about perspective and what every person's new perspective brings to how we more and more discover one another, discover our communities, and who we are and where we want to go to. Because as somebody who grew up on a ranch, and I still have those roots very much in me, the cow business is very much there and gave me a sort of no-nonsense, get-on-with-it kind of attitude to a lot of things. And it was very important, because rodeo was a sport that I was involved in as a kid, to also tell the story of women in rodeo and the cowgirls and where they came from, because that's a very, very different story from the men's story. This is not Brokeback Mountain that you're about to hear about. This is going to be something very, very different. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read a little part of it, because I guarantee you that nobody has written about cowgirls or women in the West or women in rodeo the way I did in this piece. So I'm going to share a little bit of my perspective about us with you. And I'm going to start with a section called That Awful Girl. Between 1884 and 1901, one of the West's most notorious gender-bending women was a Wild West show star. Now, rodeo actually started with the Wild West shows, so this is why I talk a lot about the Wild West shows. She would cast a long shadow down the history of rodeo. Born in 1856 to struggling pioneer parents, Martha Jane Canary was orphaned at age 13. Though her life was later colored by legend, it was actually a bleak story of poverty and alcoholism, according to historian James McLaird, who shifted patiently through frontier records to write her definitive biography. But we know one fact for sure. Martha defied convention on the gender frontier. A pretty but tough blonde girl who fended for herself and wore men's clothes as a young teen, she was dubbed Calamity Jane. For 30 years, Calamity led a transient life around the boom towns of Montana and elsewhere in the West. Her favorite hangout was Deadwood in Dakota Territory. In 1875, when she was 19, the U.S. Army was still fighting the Plains tribes. Several times, Calamity put on uniform and smuggled herself into Army expeditions as a camp follower. There, she was the soldier's pet and mastered skills that would later be important in the rodeo arena: horsemanship, firearms, and driving a big wagon team so expertly that she could reportedly knock a fly off a mule's ear with her long bullwhip. Calamity loved to make a grand entrance into Deadwood, riding down the main street in fringed buckskin jacket and breeches, her hair all windblown under her campaign hat, with pistols in her belt and a Winchester rifle across her saddle bow. Already a heavy drinker as a teen, she became a familiar figure in saloons west of the Missouri. Far from resenting her invasion of their domain, most of the male drinkers liked her. She was entertaining, funny, generous, and kind when she wasn't pissed off. From the headlines, Calamity moved to celebrity status in author Edward Wheeler's popular dime novels about the West. He made her one of the first pulp fiction heroines and never paid her a nickel of royalties. Indeed, the real Calamity was often borderline indigent. It was true that she worked hard at a living, first as a prostitute and dance hall girl, later as a teamster, gambler, faro dealer, bartender, nurse, cook, waitress, and laundress. She made a few abortive tries at small business: a brothel, a saloon, roadhouse, restaurant, and even a small ranch here in Montana. Her 2 marriages and several cohabitations with men may have been efforts to find shelter when she was broke. Later in life, she capitalized on her celebrity by publishing a pamphlet autobiography and doing lecture tours where she told tall tales about her life and sold the book and photos of herself. But in the end, most of the money she made went into drinking. Can historians peg her somewhere surely in the LGBT acronym? We can. But the Westerners of her time knew she was different. Cross-dressing alone was viewed as unnatural by the Victorians. Was she a lesbian? One newspaper writer called her a queer freak of nature. Another called her a pupil of the Oscar Wilde School of Aesthetics, which skated close to saying she was gay, since British poet Wilde was known to be homosexual. For a year during her Army time, Calamity had a teen female companion named Little Frankie O'Dare, who may or may not have been her lover. Perhaps she was bisexual. When she was young, she often arrived at a dance hall in bowler hat, black tie, and tails, and danced the Virginia reel with the girls for part of the evening. Then she'd return later in female evening wear, complete with feather boa and fancy hat, to dance with the men. In his 1990 novel, Buffalo Girls, Larry McMurtry, co-writer of the Brokeback Mountain screenplay, by the way, portrays Calamity as a hermaphrodite. I doubt she was, since intersex people are unable to have children. Historian McLaird establishes that Calamity had a daughter and a son, but she left them out to be raised by others. In my opinion, her intense identification with men, notably her handsome drinking buddy, Wild Bill Hickok, who was shot to death in a Deadwood saloon in 1876, may send the message of a gender identity issue. While she never tried to pass as a man full-time, Calamity embraced the frontier man's habits: hard drinking, cigar smoking, colorful swearing, loudmouth bragging, card playing, gunslinging, and fistfights. And she kept these habits even when wearing women's clothes. In her autobiography, she wrote, "I was at all times with the men, where excitement and adventure was to be had." We do know a second fact about Calamity. Because of her celebrity, the Wild West shows saw her box office potential. Indeed, Calamity sought jobs with the shows because the pay was good. One of her legends says she toured with Buffalo Bill's show. There's no evidence for this, but Calamity did appear with other productions. In 1884, at age 28, she joined Tom Hardwick's Great Rocky Mountain Show. Society flocked to see the infamous frontierswoman galloping astride in men's buckskins, doing her target shooting and bullwhip cracking. Essentially, they saw Calamity as a freak show. In 1901, at age 45, Calamity made her most unforgettable appearance at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. There, in the Fred Cummins Show, she was lionized by high society at a formal dinner. The big arena drew 25,000 spectators a day. For a time, the show managed to curb her drinking, and she wowed the crowds with her riding and rifle handling. On July 31st, in the parade down Buffalo's main drag, Calamity provided a unique spectacle as she drove a 100-mule team, pulling a big water wagon. An exposition photo caught her in a backstage moment. It's a poignant image: the bronzed woman with the haggard boozer face, sitting a horse in her buckskin regalia, looking older than her 45 years. Then Calamity fell off the wagon and quit the show. By late 1902, she was back in Dakota, suffering the terminal effects of alcoholism. Despite the care of friends, she died in July 1903. She was only 47. Calamity Jane may have gone to the great arena in the sky, but her reputation and the issue of appearing feminine stayed around to haunt rodeo cowgirls for the next 100 years. During the 1884-1920s heyday of the Wild West shows, more than 100 women contestants a year were still competing with men in the rough events: saddle bronc riding, steer roping, and bull riding. At that time, the Olympic Games had just actually agreed to allow female participation, but only in ladylike, non-strenuous sports. Around 1920, rodeo started to part company with the Wild West shows and establish its own identity. It did keep the circus MO, the grand entry, the glitter, the trick riding, and the fancy roping, even the clowns. Major Western cities produced their own annual rodeos. An annual circuit sprang up with championship finals in Madison Square Garden in New York. Contestants were no longer employees but free agents, yet they were still called cowboys and cowgirls. Since ranch life abounded with hard-working women, most people still had no objection to females competing with men. Indeed, rodeo cowgirls were not at an athletic disadvantage with cowboys. Many events require both genders to have a lean, light build, good balance, and quick reflexes. A hairy new event called steer wrestling, also known as shoot dogging, had been invented. You slid off a galloping horse onto the back of a galloping steer, grabbed him by the horns, and twisted him to the ground. One of the first and best damsel doggers was Fox Hastings. She got her start in the Irwin Brothers Wild West show during bronc riding and trick riding. After she married bulldogging star Mike Hastings, she took up dogging herself and set a new world record in 1924 at the Houston Rodeo. By the 1920s, however, rodeo management was pressuring cowgirls to appear more womanly. With safety in mind, the women had shed the long Victorian skirts, but management had made it clear that men's trousers were not an option. So the women rode in split skirts or bloomers. Not until well into the 1920s did cowgirls start wearing pants in the arena, everything from corduroy trousers to Eastern-style jodhpurs. Eventually, the trend dictated a Western-style dress pant tailored to fit the female body. Through the Roaring '20s, while many Americans explored bathtub gin and sexual liberation, male rodeo organizers grew ever more hostile to the Calamity Jane type of image. As a cowgirl traveled the circuit, it was now risky for her to be visibly unmarried. She either had to have a chaperone or get married. The most diligent historian of women's rodeo, Texas author Mary Lou LeCompte, briefly discusses today's homophobia towards lesbians in other sports, but she insists that almost all those old-time rodeo cowgirls were married and genuinely womanly. Translation, heterosexual. Another issue was the unseemly spectacle of women being thrown. Many rodeo producers started prohibiting women from riding slick, meaning loose stirrups, and made them tie the stirrups down. Supposedly this was safer. Actually, hobbled stirrups were more dangerous. Despite this hostile trend, National Women's Bronc Riding Champion Bonnie McCarroll of Idaho was one of the brightest cowgirl stars through the 1920s. She also signaled striving for greater femininity in her image. Petite, dark-haired, blue-eyed, Bonnie won her title at Madison Square Garden in 1922. Like many female contestants, she married a rodeo cowboy. The circuit's nomadic life made it impossible to have a fixed year-round residence, so your best shot at a stable relationship was to marry in the sport. Besides, a non-cowboy husband might not like to see his wife ass up in the air as she bucked off a horse. But Bonnie felt compelled to say things to the media like, "I like my home. I like pretty clothes. I like to sew and do all sorts of feminine things." Her husband, Frank McCarroll, told the press that Bonnie was the best little cook in the world and some dressmaker, too. Then, at the 1929 Pendleton Roundup, Bonnie drew a bronc named Black Cat and came out of the chute with her stirrups hobbled. The horse somersaulted, and one of Bonnie's feet got caught in the tied-down stirrup. Black Cat scrambled up and ran, dragging and kicking her horribly. Bonnie died in the hospital of massive head injuries. Her tragic death provided the excuse that the rodeo establishment was looking for. Instead of accepting responsibility for having imposed the hobbled stirrup rule, professional rodeos began barring women from competition. The trend was accentuated by Western movie actor Gene Autry, who became a nationwide power in rodeo production. Autry felt strongly that women's place was in the home, a view that was painfully visible in how his films portrayed females. By World War II, cowgirls were barred from everything but the safe stuff, like trick riding competitions and rodeo queen. They became the rhinestone hat band on the Stetson of rodeo life. With all that massive pressure to conform, any lesbian or bi women who had been quietly doing the circuit were probably buried deep in cover marriages by now. During World War II, some out-of-work cowgirls went to work in the defense industry. When the war was over, they were in no mood to continue sitting on the fence. By 1948, they had declared war on the male-dominated establishment by organizing the Girls Rodeo Association. They fanned out across the country, promoting a hot new sport called barrel racing, aiming to get back in the professional arena. GRA also staged all-women rodeos, where females competed boldly in all the standard events. The most celebrated of these post-war activists was Alice Greenough, women's world champion bronc rider. Alice and her sister Marge, along with their brothers Turk and Deb, also champions, were the second generation of a Montana rodeo dynasty. Alice Greenough may have toed the line on cowgirl glamour, but in a time when most women's career choices were limited to secretary, nurse, teacher, and housewife, she lived a fast and exciting life that Western teen girls of my generation could only dream about. She and her siblings had actually been to that fabled place called Hollywood, where her brother Turk had married the famous fan dancer Sally Rand, and Alice did stunt riding for the movies. In fact, Alice had been married and divorced not once, but, gasp, twice. Divorce was still a shocking new thing in those days. So the very mention of Alice's name gave us ranch country girls some delightful bohemian shivers. Around 1949, when I was 13, Alice Greeno made an unforgettable appearance at my hometown rodeo. She had formed a rodeo production company with cowboy colleague Joe Orr. Deer Lodge, which then had a population of 6,000, sat in the heart of western Montana pioneer cattle country, and it held a rodeo every year for almost half a century. Local promoter Tony Schneeberger, who owned the corner bar in town, was also chairman of the Powell County Fair Board. He produced the big event in August: county fair, livestock show, race meet, and a world championship rodeo. When the Girls Rodeo Association lobbied Tony about putting a GRA event on his program, they found him to be an open-minded guy. So Tony contracted the Greeno Orr outfit for his show. The Deer Lodge Fairgrounds sat amid stately cottonwood groves along the highway north of town. On the rodeo's opening night, the grandstand was packed, with the smell of hamburgers and beer drifting from concessions under the stands, mingling with the earthy odor of horse and cow manure from the brightly floodlit arena. All the big names were there. Deer Lodge was the next stop on the World Championship Tour, so everybody was gunning for points. As men saddled broncs in the row of chutes, it was time for Alice's exhibition ride, with stirrups hobbled. The announcer's circusy draw echoed around the fairgrounds. And now, ladies and gentlemen, coming out of chute number 4, we've got Alice Greeno of Red Lodge, Montana. Sitting in the grandstand, my girlfriends and I were beside ourselves with excitement. We represented several ranch families and horsey town families, and were dressed to kill in our best Stetsons and dress pants. Our hand-embroidered cowgirl shirts, a fashion rage then, were stitched by our mothers or ourselves. Our eyes were fixed on Alice's big Stetson, which was barely visible over the top of the chute. Then Alice yelled, "Outside!" and the gate swung open. The bronc burst out in a frenzy of sunfishing and corkscrewing. Alice rode him for the 8 seconds in her Hollywood cowgirl shirt and tailored pants with sequins and beading. Her hat didn't even fly off. As she made a flaming, flashing spectacle on the floodlights, we girls cheered ourselves cross-eyed. Later in the program, Alice was back with other mounted cowgirls for the first barrel race we had ever seen. The arena crew set up the triangle of 3 50-gallon drums in the arena, and one by one the girls rode wildly against the stopwatch, making a cloverleaf pattern around the barrels with their galloping horses leaning over at a 45-degree angle as they pocketed each barrel in explosions of flying dirt. It was spectacular, and the crowd loved it. Those 3 days were heady stuff for little old Deer Lodge. In the evenings, every bar and restaurant filled up with hard-drinking contestants and fans. The local chippies worked on getting a rodeo cowboy in bed before the end of the night. My starstruck posse and I were allowed by our parents to hang out at a popular family steakhouse, the 4B's Cafe. Remember the 4B's? Now you know this is real stuff, right? The place was more crowded than a Hollywood red carpet, the air choky with cigarette smoke. Couples were slow dancing by the jukebox with Patti Page wailing the Tennessee Waltz. It was easy to rub elbows with the rodeo greats. They weren't walled off behind bodyguards and publicists as celebrities are today. I vividly remember the moment as I sat at the counter when the legendary Jim Shoulders, all-around world champion, slid onto the red leather stool next to mine and solemnly ordered a hamburger. Nearby, Alice and Marge Greeno were talking to some people dressed in former cowgirl wear for the evening. I also vividly remember being too shy to ask Alice for an autograph. So that gives you a little slice of history and perspective and culture that maybe you haven't seen before. And believe me, a lot of it was new to me as I was digging into this. As I said, I think our perspectives all matter. And I think that Montana, beginning with this wonderful moment in this evening tonight, this program, and all of the hard work by Carl Olson, all his colleagues at the library, putting this together, beginning a new moment of new perspectives in Montana, that hopefully people will be able to share more with one another, know one another better. Montana will become a little older and wiser and more mature. And I think it's all about sharing those perspectives that we have with one another. And each of you here tonight brings your perspective. And perhaps some of you in the room have histories and things that you would like to write about and share. Maybe there are books in the room here waiting to be born, or documentary films waiting to be made, or songs to be written, or poems to be written. And I would encourage you to do that, because it's very, very, very important for each and every perspective, because each one is important. The whole picture of Montana is going to be missing something if you don't tell that story. So once again, I want to thank everybody for bringing me here this evening to be part of this evening. And for any of you that are interested in any of my books, I'm going to be outside at the table outside. I have a few copies to sell. Any of you that have questions, we can talk a little bit. If any of you have copies you would like me to autograph, I would be very happy to do that. And once again, thank you very much.
Let's thank Patricia for coming. And Patricia? So please do go out. Patricia will be at a table outside. You can have books signed and purchase her books there. And you can also find many of her books, including The Lavender Locker Room, in our library. We will be showing a short documentary film called Gay Pioneers, but please do visit Patricia and enjoy some more refreshments. Thank you again for coming, Patricia.